Uh, Calling to order the July 10th meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee. We'll start with roll call.
Ogleton, Gleason,
Here.
Wills, Lord, Hodges, Rasso Adela,
Here.
Bird,
Here.
Johnson R,
Here.
Nolan,
Here.
Gilmore,
Here.
Cooper,
Here.
Rasso Allen,
Here.
Patel, Kiefer excused, Holloway excused.
And we do have a quorum.
And at this time, if there are any citizens with business to present to the committee, you're welcome to speak. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, review and approve minutes of the April 3rd, 2023 meeting.
I guess I'll say so move. Second it.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is to review and accept the financial report through April. Any discussion?
I'll move that we accept it, the financial report as presented.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. On to next item, preview of year 49 public input process.
Thank you. So I know we have some still newer members. So I will go through kind of where we are in the process of planning and where we're heading. CAC comes together to provide input and oversight of our CDBG program, that's Community Development Block Grant. And as a condition of getting that funding, the city has to go through a process called consolidated planning. And what that involves is a 5-year plan that is submitted obviously every 5 years, and kind of sets the overall needs and goals that the city has. Then each year within that 5-year plan, we need to do an annual plan that says, okay, we have a wider plan for a longer term, but this particular year with this particular money, what do we think we're going to do with that money? And what happens is, because you've already kind of in the 5-year plan set your big picture needs in your community and your big picture goals in your community, in the annual planning, you have limitations on how far you can deviate from that. So the input that we gather each year as part of the annual plan is largely to see, is what we see as needs in the community this year still largely the same as what we saw when we did the 5-year plan, or are they vastly different? And if they're vastly different, maybe that warrants going through an amendment process to make changes to the plan. But if it's mostly the same, then you will still go by a lot of the guidelines and the rules and the needs that you laid out in your 5-year plan. So it's kind of an annual temperature check to say, is what we did in the 5-year plan still valid, or do we need to make a change? And this 5-year plan has been eventful. So we are currently, we just started July 1st in the 4th year of our 5-year plan. And so we are talking now about going out and doing the summer input for the 5th year of our 5-year plan. And if you think about what's encompassed in that plan, our 5-year planning process began in 2020. And so obviously there were a lot of things that happened then. And so last year when we went out for our annual public input, we kind of talked about, those of you who are here with us, were we going to see a lot of difference in what was needed because of COVID? And what we found was no, we didn't see a huge difference in what we needed. What we saw was quantity was different. We just needed vastly more of those things, like affordable housing, like childcare, like things for kids to do after school, those kinds of things. We didn't see that sea change in what was needed. We just saw a lot more people needed it. So the only, aside from the public input, what we kind of bring to the table as well are a variety of required sources that we can call upon to sort of look and see, are they showing any change, even if our public input doesn't? And so those are things like the census. We rely on the American Community Survey, which is a 5-year rolling average census that asks a lot of questions about input and household makeup and income and those kinds of things, employment. But we also have some studies that HUD requires that we get. And those include what's called the Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing and the Housing Needs Assessment. So we're required to do those every 5 years, and so we rely on that data as well. And what that helps us to do is say, yes, we're going out and we're getting public input in the form of surveys, in the form of focus groups or open houses, online meetings, those kinds of things. But you only capture, not a ton of people typically. You might capture a few hundred with a survey. You might capture a few dozen with a meeting. Which it's a really big city. So is that enough input to reflect the will of the community? And that's what the studies bring to the table, is those are those bigger picture that, yes, you may not have been able to get tens of thousands of people to reply to your survey, but what the people who did reply are saying is reflected in the data that you're getting from these kind of third-party sources. So the purpose of the public input is to kind of confirm that the direction we've been going in is still the direction we should be going in, and it's still what the community is saying that we need. So that's kind of the framework of which that we start down the path of doing public input. But it's important to remember that the input we're talking about is for next program year. That means July 1st of 2024. So we're doing this public input now. It's the first step in our planning process because we'll go through this summer, we'll gather public input from various ways that we'll talk about. And then when we come back in October, the CAC will review the input that we got, and the CAC will need to vote on recommendations for local objectives. And what that means is what it is that you want the applications for CDBG funding to be pointed towards. And then in October, you'll vote on those local objectives, and then we will forward those to City Council. I don't know if it's me that's getting the feedback. Nothing else is on. We'll forward those recommendations to City Council, and from there our application process will begin. So all of you who just scored the applications and we just did the contracts and we're just now kicking those off, this is the very first step in next year's application process, is saying what is the input that we're getting and does it support the local objectives that we have? Are there any questions about that so far? Okay, so with the public input, it's not required that the CAC vote on this, first of all. But what we do is we like to bring it to you and give you a chance to look at it and give us any ideas or input or suggestions of where you think we should go and who you think we should be reaching out to. Because it is a process to get public input. I mean, we want to reach a broad range of people, and we rely on CAC's personal and professional networks to make suggestions to us on that. So that said, you find a document that says proposed input for year 50. And let's just take a moment to say, year 50 of CDBG, can you believe it? HUD is talking about a big 50th anniversary celebration of CDBG next year. So we'll have to wait and see what that's going to look like. But hopefully we'll be able to do something locally to support that as well. But, and I just, on a personal note, I was just telling Dawn the other day, the very first CAPER, so CAPER is our annual report at the end of a year. And when I very first started here, I did the caper for the year that had just been completed, and that was year 35. So by the time we finish year 50, I will have been here 15 years, and that is crazy. Like, I just can't believe that. Obviously, I started when I was 12. It's the only conclusion that can be drawn. So anyhow, so our input for the upcoming year, kind of the first part of it, and I don't want to say the largest part because the survey shouldn't be the main thing that you do, but the reality is that's probably going to be the thing you do that reaches the most people, is the survey. So we do a survey online, and we also do it by paper to get a broad spectrum of people. Our plan is to have the survey open for about not quite 7 weeks, right about 7 weeks. And we'll send that survey out online, but we also have our subrecipients, our CDBG subrecipients, the nonprofits that we work with, the things like the Housing Council and Cluster, the Shelter Transitional Housing Group, all of those kind of partners. We've sent it out in the school districts before. We've sent it out to our public housing residents and our Section 8 voucher holders that we have emails for before. So we try to reach, the goal that HUD wants you to do is reach the people who are benefiting from CDBG, and that's low and moderate income people. So we try to think of ways that we can get that survey out in front of them. In past years, not so much the last couple of years, but we have had the library has worked with us to, so the library has a lot of computers that people that don't have computers can go and sign up and use the computers for free. And for a couple of years, they had the login screen was our survey. And so to log in and use the free computers at the library, you weren't required to take the survey, but it was the screen you saw. So if you wanted to take the survey, you could. So there's that. And then paper copies, we have paper copies here at City Hall at all publicly open city buildings like Public Works and the Parks Department and the libraries. And then we distribute them through our subrecipients and other nonprofit groups. We try to put them in places where we know that low-income people might be coming. We've put them at our revenue desk downstairs when a lot of people tend to come in and pay their sewer bills. And so we've tried to get people to take the survey that way. And we did include in the packet for you a copy of last year's survey. This is kind of the paper version of the survey. And it does have a map on it, but for some reason the map didn't print out. But we tend during the 5-year planning process to not want to take things off of the survey. We can always add questions on, but we don't want to take things off because we would like to be able to see over the course of the 5 years how the responses change. So if you have any suggestions of additions to the survey, we are certainly open to that. And then in addition to the survey, we also have had the last few years virtual public meetings. We kind of are coming out of COVID, and so going back to doing more of the in-person, but we're still going to keep the virtual public meeting option. For one thing, there are some people who would prefer to attend that way, and for another, it enables us to record the presentation so that we can put it onto our website, and that's just another way if somebody wanted to watch it on YouTube, that they could go and view the public meeting and then submit comments to us after they viewed the video. So we're going to we plan to keep the virtual public input meeting as well. And then in-person input opportunities. So we're going to go back to doing some in-person. Last year we did some outreach at Farmers Market, which I think was great because you're getting kind of a wide cross-section of the community. But what we're going to try to do this year is try to target those low-income locations a little heavier. So Dawn had some great suggestions for working with some of our nonprofit groups, especially ones that serve youth, to maybe try to be there like in their lobby during pickup and drop-off of kids to see if parents will do surveys at that time, to work with some of our other nonprofit providers, and then, just anywhere that we think that we can reach them where they're already going there for another reason is kind of the goal. And I think farmers market worked fine, but I think if we can bring in places that are more likely to serve the demographic that is served by CDBG, we might get a slightly different response. So those are kind of our plans for public input. So included, you have the copy of the survey, which again, if you have suggestions for additions, we're very happy to add to that. We also included the slides from last year's online public input meeting. So you can educate yourself on CDBG also, but what we do is we kind of explain on each category of things that CDBG can do and seek public input on each of those categories, because you kind of have to break it up into some logical chunks. Otherwise, you know, where do people even start? You kind of have to remind them of what CDBG can do before they can tell you what they want it to do. Otherwise, we get a lot of like fix the potholes in their street, which is a wonderful goal, but not necessarily something CDBG can do. And so we try to be a little more focused than that. Also in the slides on page 7, there's a reference map, and that's the example of the map. It's also in the survey. I don't know why it didn't print out. But in all things that we're seeking input for, there's kind of two components to the input that we would like to hear, and that is what do we need, but also where do we need it? Because different parts of the community may need different things. And so maybe some parts of the community, you want to see more affordable housing there, but other parts of the community, you need job opportunities, or you need, you know, youth services or things like that. So just in a very simple grid, we kind of divided the city into quadrants to say, you know, what do you think each of these quadrants needs the most? And that appears in the online and the paper survey as well, but for some reason it didn't print out. And so that is what's in your packet, are just your slides there and the survey, and the map is included in the slides. So any questions about those public input pieces that we talked about?
Heather, I have one. Are these surveys available in other languages?
So they aren't currently. So HUD has a calculation that is, they have a limited English proficiency calculation that you do to determine whether or not you're required to proactively translate things into another language. And it is determined based on if you have a certain percentage of your population that speaks a given language. And we have not reached that threshold yet. But that said, we are always required to make accommodations for people who have needs of all kinds, which would include translation from another language, but also sign language, oral interpretation, large print, things like that. We've had people where they've wanted us to read it to them over the phone, and we've done that. So all of our flyers and our handouts and all of that kind of stuff includes language on there if they request an accommodation. And it also has language in Spanish. That's our most commonly, by far, our most commonly used language here in Davenport, other than English, which even that one doesn't meet the minimum requirement. But in Spanish, it has both the English and Spanish translation of if you need interpretation services, please let us know and we'll get that for you. And when we do need interpretation, which we have quite a few times through the years, we go through Translations Unlimited and just hire a translator that way.
Would it be prohibitively cost expensive to proactively just, you know, translate just the form itself? I understand that we haven't met the required threshold.
Sure.
But, you know, to do it, I think might be good, because, I mean, you know, you put something in front of somebody who says, oh, we have to have you call and get this translated. That's just another barrier.
And it is. Yeah, no, we can look into the cost of it. This one might be a little cheaper, or I shouldn't say cheaper, less expensive. I lost my, write that down, I've lost my agenda. So we did look into, about 3 years ago, translating some of our loan documents into Spanish proactively or, comprehensively. And I think maybe because those were legal documents, they were very expensive to translate. But these are perhaps more casual and shouldn't maybe be quite as much. So we can look into that. That's no trouble.
And I really had just brought that up because I saw most of it as just kind of like, check the box. So if it's in the same place on every form,
Yes.
you wouldn't require a translator unless they put something in the other section or
Sure.
something like that.
Sure. Yeah, no, we can definitely investigate that. It's not bad to revisit it because we, haven't done that, haven't requested a cost estimate in several years that I can think of. Yeah, it's just the labor of the translation is the only cost that we've had. And then once you have it translated, you own it and you can do whatever you want with it. So,
I just had one question about this reference map. Is that divided by population?
So we've used the same map for this will be the 5th year of the 5-year plan. And at the time that we divided it, first of all, it's just a staff level decision. And what we kind of used as the dividing point, north to south, was age of housing stock is why we hit it at Kimberly, because there's a substantial, you can just drive around and see the housing truly below Locust Street, but also below Kimberly is just of an age that's substantially older than it is above Locust Street, which can be an indicator of low and moderate income households. The east to west, there was no particular reason that we picked Brady Street other than that's kind of, I think a lot of people think of it as the middle of town more so than any particular demographic that we picked that.
I guess, so 2 questions. One is, so the presentation that we have, that's part of the online survey?
It's part of the online public input meeting, not the survey as a whole.
Okay.
We can include some of that information if you think it'd be useful, but the presentation that's included is just the slides that we use in the online public meeting.
Okay. And I do think it would be useful. Part of me was just looking at and, I don't know, seeing some kind of, I feel like the people that are filling out this survey may or may not be, may be intimidated by the way that it's worded and written. And also there's not a lot of description as far as what we're talking, what is affordable housing? What is economic development? What does that all mean? So for somebody answering these questions, I think that would be a benefit. And then as far as the title for affordable housing, I would love to see that say something else other than affordable housing.
Okay.
Because I think, I would be like inventory would be my number one thing there.
Yeah.
But, or housing programs to kind of match up with the presentation would be better. Those are my 2 cents.
Nope, I think that's valid. So just I know we have some newer members, so just to let you know the categories that are on here. So when we switched to this format, before we switched to this format, we had a much shorter, more general survey. And there was a feeling at the time from some quarters that because we weren't presenting everything that CDBG could do, we were limiting the options that people could choose, because we weren't saying, well, they can do this, this, and this, and this. We were only saying 2 things instead of 10 things. And so how would you even know CDBG could do, number, 3 through 10? And so what we came up with at the time was HUD has this concept called matrix code, and it lists out literally, there's hundreds of them, of all the individual things that CDBG can do. And so we kind of condensed them down, believe it or not, this is condensed, but we condensed them down into like categories that are more specific, but not so specific, but we can so we just took the language straight from HUD, but we can, there's nothing that says we have to. We can tweak, at least some of the headings, I think, for sure. Yeah, and a little more description. And I think in the online version, there might be, this is the paper version. In the online version, if I remember correctly, it presents like, not quite a slide like this, but it's like, it gives you a screen. Okay, in the next section, we're going to talk about, affordable housing. And, I think there is a little more description in the online in that you get a screen and then you get the questions, and then you get a screen and then you get the questions. But I think in the paper version, it's just not there, but we can expand upon that. Other comments? And you don't have to think of them all today. So what we usually do is say by the end of the week, if something comes to you and you have a stroke of genius of what you would like us to include or tweak, let us know by the end of this week. And then next week we'll get the survey set up and we will start getting it live. And then for all of these things, once we have the survey link, obviously we rely on you to share that with your personal and professional networks. And then if we have any specific days where we know we'll be doing on-site public input at any given place, we will share that with you as well.
Yes, kind of tagging on to Reagan's comment, there's a lot of things under affordable housing. I think it's a term that can there be another category besides affordable housing? Because I feel like some of the programs are for incentives.
Incentives to?
Like residential historic preservation or lead-based paint removal, where the down payment assistance specifically and how home buyer counseling is helping for the ability to purchase a home, where rental rehabilitation, I don't know how that helps the home buyer, where the benefit is,
Sure. Yes, I think I see where you're going with it. So when I said that we kept to the HUD categories, so affordable housing in a HUD sense has all different kinds, both rental and owner, and same with economic development. And so they were grouped together because they're housing, not necessarily because they're owner versus rental. And I take your point on that. I think, like I say, we try to keep it largely the same throughout the 5 years because we want to be able to see how things change. But next year at this time, we will be launching into the public input process for our new 5-year plan. And I think if we wanted to really make a wholesale change to this in terms of categorizing things, it might be better to do it next year if that feels right to the group. Only just because I'm hesitant to break out things into categories this far into the game. That's my only concern with that.
I almost feel like it's a component between economic development and housing incentive. Whereas if I was somebody who, what can I do? I only make so much money. I would look at this and maybe wonder, well, there's things on here like residential historic preservation. I understand what energy efficiency improvements are, but that person may not. And the rental rehabilitation and the lead-based paint removal. I guess in one sense, if the income is low and there's low properties, but they have these issues, this is what can help me. So I kind of see it sort of flows a couple different ways. But I'm not sure that they understand all of the, that
And
if they're looking at it to answer the questions.
Yeah, and I generally would agree with you. As I said, we used to have a much simpler survey with a lot fewer categories for exactly that reason. And there was a strong feeling when this one was implemented that we were limiting the outcome by having fewer categories or fewer, by not listing all the things that CDBG could do. We were limiting, we were kind of, the feeling at the time was that we were predicting the outcome of what people wanted because we weren't telling them all the things that CDBG could do. And so that's how some of these more, you know, I would say less common things got added back in, you know, in terms of like even getting out of the housing, you know, getting into infrastructure and area benefits, things like parking improvements, you know, I would say the vast majority of cities don't use their CDBG that way, you know, and down into public services, I mean, it gets very granular in terms of all the different public services that you can have. And so, yeah, I would tend to agree that some of them are a little more, you know, a little less obvious than others. But I think the feeling when they were added back was that they're eligible, therefore they should be there. But I think we can maybe group them differently going forward. And like Reagan says, maybe give more explanation to what they actually are.
Maybe.
And I think if we go into next year's input with the idea that maybe we have a category that is housing, and underneath of it, we have several categories of, you know, owner, renter, and then just property improvements, generally speaking, for example, have more subcategories so that they're grouped in a more sensible way. That might maybe get to some of that.
Does HUD give you the categories with which to work with, and you choose from those what fits?
So these, the gray headings here, affordable housing, economic development, infrastructure, and public services, those are the 4 categories that HUD
That's it.
has eligibility under.
okay,
So
okay.
anything that isn't listed here isn't eligible. So, and this is the way that HUD groups them into those 4 categories. So we just strictly stuck with HUD's, you know, like I said, there's this thing called a matrix code, and
Right.
we just sorted them by the matrix codes that HUD uses. And these are the 4 categories under which you can do stuff, you know. I mean, and they're broad, you know, CDBG is a very broad program. It has room for a lot underneath of it, which is both a blessing and a curse sometimes, I think. That we have some other programs like Home Investment Partnership is strictly housing. And so in one way, it's very easy because all it is housing. But in another way, it's a little hard because it's extremely specific and granular about housing, because that's all it does. Whereas CDBG can tend to be more broad because it does a lot more, but it's also more broad. So, you know, it's kind of are we even really talking about when you say something like lead-based paint? What does that even mean? So I see that it can be confusing. I really do.
So Reagan's suggestion is probably the best one we can actually work with,
Well, and again, like
to
I would
explain
say,
it a little bit.
yeah, I think if we explain better, and you know, do like an intro maybe to each of these, and say something like, for example, CDBG can be used for all different types of housing assistance, including assistance to buyers to buy homes, assistance to landlords to renovate homes, assistance to you know, nonprofits to do specific housing for special populations like seniors or the disabled. You know, we can maybe, you know, in a narrative, more approachable way, explain why there's this random basket of words that get thrown together, maybe. If that is okay, if you feel like that meets what you're trying to say. Okay. And then look at next year, really breaking out those categories into more specific buckets and trying to find a way to do that that doesn't preference one over another. That would be my only thought there, but we can think about that next year.
Thank you. My only thought is I don't think we need more buckets. I just want to see that word affordable gone. I think it should be housing programs.
Okay.
You know.
Okay, I
just-
think we can make that change this year.
Yeah.
That doesn't affect the content of what people will respond to.
Yeah,
It's just
I
a heading.
think for
so-
me it means something different under what these things. So housing programs would be
Okay.
a lot simpler. Gosh, and I had another thought and I just lost it. How about if you were to put that little description in that note about, can do all these things, including these, but not limited to, could we do like a blank? Like a other option where they could fill in?
We could, with the understanding that we
Right.
may get a lot of things that we're not gonna be able to do.
Right, because what, you may
Yeah.
get one, but I feel like, at least in their eyes,
And we do have
their ideas
also,
or thoughts
the
are
last
different.
question on the survey, or I guess the last question before the demographic questions is,
Oh, okay.
are there other things that you need that aren't on this list, But there isn't one for each category, if that's what you're maybe leaning towards. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not suggesting that we change anything. I just would like a clarification. Does down payment assistance only require, or only apply to purchasing? Or do we offer a rental deposit assistance?
We can assist property owners or, landlords or nonprofits is more often the case to acquire property. It's not called down payment assistance in that situation, it's called acquisition of rental property. But for homeowners, the only form of assistance for homeowners, or for someone to buy a home would be down payment assistance. And for landlords, we can also acquire as well. Or a nonprofit can acquire and we can assist them with the
But that wouldn't
acquisition.
be covered under the CBDG.
No, it's eligible under CDBG. We've helped nonprofits obtain,
But they would still have to apply through the nonprofit.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
So as I mentioned, just if you think of other things or you have other suggestions or thoughts that come to you, you can just shoot us an email by the end of the week. And then next week, we'll start getting it set up in the online system. And, once we have a link that's live, we'll send it out to you.
Next topic is other business. Heather?
I don't have anything in other business other than that with the guidance that we received tonight, we will go forward and spend the next, month and a half to 2 months on gathering the public input. So we don't foresee that there would be any need to meet at this point in August or September, unless the CAC would choose to. During that time, we'll just be gathering public input and compiling responses that we can bring back to you at the October meeting, which will be October the 2nd. If the CAC would choose to not meet until then, staff wouldn't see a problem with that.
Do we need a motion for that?
We have traditionally, if we want to cancel.
I will entertain a motion to cancel the August and September meetings of 2023.
I second it.
Subject to the call of the chair, if we would have pressing business arise.
I think we can do a voice vote on this one.
Yeah, I don't think we need a roll call.
And last item on the agenda is to adjourn. May I have a motion? So moved. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
I'll take care of that.